feel as though no matter what I say in this video, it's going to be very divisive. I hope people understand that what I say here is entirely my opinion. Something that I dislike, another person might enjoy. This is titled as a review, but this is more of a thoughts. This isn't being made to sway people to a certain viewpoint for this game. I just want to put my thoughts on this game into a video. This game, in my opinion, is so hard to actually talk about. Because I don't think the game is necessarily bad. I actually quite enjoyed my time with it. It's just so strangely designed as a video game. You can go from absolutely insane Dragon Ball Z anime bullshit boss fights with Titan, adrenaline pumping through your veins. Then the second you're done with that, you're forced to do an hour of fetch quests during the main quest, just to get some stuff for mid to build a boat. This isn't me saying that downtime in a story is bad, but this downtime, or being forced back to the hideaway, happens so much during the story that, in my opinion, it actively hurts the pacing. Speaking of pacing, every single time you hit one of these filler sections, these can take varying time, 20 minutes, 1 hour, etc. Every single time you finish one, without fail, the game will pop up side quests. Let me talk about the side quests. I just don't know why there are so many side quests. It got to a point where I just gave up even doing them after the Traders Pass stuff in Boklad, which is roughly the midpoint of the game. They are obnoxious. And it's crazy because some of these quests have good writing and good lore, but then you have absolutely stupid side quests like a guy dropping his crystal down a small cliff and you have to go down there and kill 3 scorpions to get it back. Most of the quests I'd done just felt absolutely meaningless and unnecessary. I've also seen online that doing these side quests gets you some important character moments. Why? Why are these behind optional skippable content? In my eyes, having such important character moments that can possibly make or break the second half of the game behind optional quests like this is a failure of the writing. It's optional content. You should not have to do it to get a full character arc. Side quests should only be enhancement, not requirement. A lot of the side quests I've done could easily be solved or even removed if the NPCs just weren't too lazy to take 5 steps. For example, there's a point during the main story where you find out that Torgal is a reincarnation of Fenrir or something along those lines. And after a while, you unlock a side quest from Karen. She tells Clive about how Torgal hasn't had an appetite recently and doesn't know what to do. Clive and Karen talk for a little bit, and eventually she asks Clive to talk to Hippocrates, who is less than a 30-second walk away. Why couldn't Karen go and ask him? And then when you accept the quest or start the quest, she then tells Clive about the gazelle that would satiate Torgal herself. It's baffling. So many side quests feel artificially extended for the sake of lore and world building. Speaking of the world, I didn't really like this. The aesthetic of Valisthea felt a bit too generic and grounded. I was actually a little bit worried about this during the marketing run of the game, and the aesthetic and the world not being quote unquote fantasy enough for me. Everything just has this realistic feel about the world. Now you might be thinking, well, Final Fantasy VII Remake is also realistic, and you are absolutely correct. The difference is that Original 7 and the remake both have a level of goofiness and exaggeration to them. The character models, the way characters move, this is easier to notice in the original, but remake still has a certain amount of it. 16, on the other hand, has an entirely serious tone. On the topic of worlds, let's talk about the structure of this game and how it's designed. This game is split into 2 sections, open areas where you can explore and do side quests, and linear action focused missions. The action focused missions are absolutely incredible. They are condensed set pieces that vary from 45 minutes to 90 minutes. Every single one made me feel like it respected me as a player. However, I cannot say the same for the open areas. They are completely empty. It is monotonous to go through these areas. There is no points of interest. There are no secrets to find. All the game does is put a marker on your screen and you push left stick towards it. Let me show you an example of these open areas. This is a very late game area. You have Clive at the bottom here, main quest objective at the top right, and all this open area to the left. There is nothing to find there to the left. Not a single thing. The only thing you will find is item pickups that are just potions or basic crafting materials, which you can eventually just buy from the shops anyway. Anytime that I veered from the path in these areas, I would typically find a large open area, and every single time I thought to myself, wow, I bet there's a hunt here later, and every single time I was correct. The next thing I want to talk about is the lack of RPG systems. This really bothered me. There's zero elemental strategy, there's zero buffs or debuffs. In this regard, 16 is a very shallow game, and for me, that actively hurts the experience and what I expect from a Final Fantasy game. The game does have enemies buffing other enemies, but they're so minimal you just don't notice them, apart from one which forms a protective barrier around an enemy and you must break it with a skill. And this is the only time these buffs actually matter, and they appear like 3 times throughout the entire game. Enemy variety is just completely non-existent. The smaller generic enemies are literal trash mobs. These enemies exist to style on, and that's cool. But for me, my fun came from staggering enemies and seeing just how much damage I could do during a stagger phase, which ultimately just came down to ability dumping. The best enemies to fight are the larger, tougher enemies with a stagger bar, because they have actual mechanics. Even if only minor mechanics, bosses are the same. Sort of. Final Fantasy XVI is a game where stats literally do not matter. So, what genius idea do the developers have in mind for making the bosses fresh? They make the bosses scale to you, or you scale to them. I'm not entirely sure which. As an example, I was in the final-ish area. It was very late game, and I was almost 10 levels over. Most enemies went down very quickly, maybe in a couple hits. I then go to a boss fight, and it's equalized. I really hope someone does do tests for this to confirm this theory. Now, you might be thinking, surely stats don't matter, as the game has a gearing system. And well, you could not be more wrong. The most impactful accessory I found was one that gave you plus 30 defense. That is an absolutely stupid amount. Just to give some context, you get 3 defense per level up. That is 10 levels worth of defense in just one equip. I done an S rank hunt 12 levels under with this equipped, and I barely took any damage apart from one big attack it done. Weapons are entirely cosmetic. Without fail, you can craft the best weapon at that time directly after beating an icon fight because it drops a shard. But as I said, this doesn't matter because boss fights scale. I guess this is a good time to talk about the combat. I think overall, this is a good combat system. It's just a bit shallow and it plays its hand at the start of the game. I used every icon for at least a little bit, a couple hours after unlocking them, and every single time I just reverted back to Phoenix, Garuda and Ramuh because they were the ones that felt the best for me and how I like to play, which was getting stun bar down as fast as possible and doing mega damage during staggered downtime. The entire gameplay loop is just dodge and attack and dump abilities on cooldown. The game has a parry, just like Devil May Cry. If you attack at the right time, you'll parry the enemy, which slows down everything around you and allows you to get free damage essentially. The issue with parrying is that it's not really satisfying to learn for the average player. The average player might learn a small handful of attacks to parry, but they're just not going to go hard in learning them when they can just dodge and essentially get the same outcome. The boss fights as a whole are absolutely highlights of this game. They are pure unfiltered adrenaline. I really don't have anything bad to say here. Only one of the icon fights fell short in my opinion, and that was Odin. You just fight Barnabas in his semi-prime state 3 times. 4 times if you count the ocean fight just before this, which again was just Barnabas's semi-prime form. But the rest are amazing. They're all unique, they're all mechanically distinct from one another. Top marks for this. I can't say much more than this. Finally, I want to talk a bit about the story. I really enjoyed the first half of the story, seeing all these kingdoms and factions reacting to big events like an icon like Titan being taken down was truly intriguing and made me want to continue to see how they keep reacting and plan out the next move. The downside to this is that they never really commit to showing you the execution of these moves. It's always in these nicely made map animations showing each faction's moves off screen. Then around the midpoint of the game, the Bahamut fight, the political atmosphere is completely gone because most of the factions are gone. They are removed from the story. So the second half of the game really just boils down to chasing Barnabas and Ultima until both are defeated, and while you do this, nothing is really going on in the world. There are no threats left because you are currently locking heads with Barnabas, and Ultima can't do anything serious at this stage because he needs Clive as a vessel to do anything. The structure of 16's story is very reminiscent of Final Fantasy XIV and how that game presents its story to the player. Even down to the annoying cutscenes where it's just 3 NPCs stood in a circle talking, and every couple seconds they emote and snap their head to the person they're talking to with bad lip syncing.
They prey on the desperate, stealing from those with gil and bullying those without it into joining their flock.
And this just doesn't work for 16 in my opinion. 14 is a game that's got history. It is filled to the brim with literal spaghetti code that's been left over from 1.0. The game is also an MMO, so expansions and the subsequent patches, they release on a deadline, and 16 simply shouldn't have any of these restrictions. It is a brand new game built from scratch. So what are my closing thoughts? I think the game is overall a good game. It's just that in the important areas, which are story and RPG mechanics, the game falls short and disappoints. So what is my recommendation? If you own a PS5, pick it up on sale. It's definitely not worth full price. If you're a PC gamer and the game is confirmed to get a PC release sometime in the future, this is not a system seller. Don't buy a PS5 for this. Just wait for the PC release and get it on sale.